It's so important to incentivize what's going on in states and cities and companies. We had it with Dan Riker. Where's Dan? Is he here somewhere? We put together a little program a while ago, and we had different states come and tell what they're doing. I put together a little brochure afterwards. There'll be an equal number of blue and red states, and there's a lot going on. Innovation, different, and you can learn from that. Not only can other states learn from it, but the federal government can learn from it. It's the sort of the Brandeis role of experimenting in states. So that has been happening and can continue to happen and should be encouraged. So that's number one. Number two, I am tremendously impressed with what's coming out of our great researcher universities. We have our group at Stanford, Sally Benson. I saw she's around here somewhere. Sally, she does a wonderful job of pulling all the stuff together around Stanford. It's impressive. I have the privilege of chairing the MIT Energy Advisory Committee, so I see what those guys are doing. And what's happening is tremendous. I feel quite confident in listening to what's going on. We will very soon have the capacity for large-scale storage of electricity. That is a big deal. It takes the intermittency problem away from wind and solar. It also makes a big contribution to national security, because we all know how vulnerable our grid is to cyber attack or something. If you have a little storage, you have a little time to get yourself rearranged. And so this is a huge potential development. At any rate, I think the R&D effort deserves real support. And it's not that big a deal when it comes to money. You can't even find it in the rounding error of the federal budget. And Sally, you remember, we went to Washington, and we were set up with the Republicans on the House Energy Committee. These are supposed to be the bad guys, right? Selling them energy R&D was an absolute piece of cake. No problem. As soon as somebody says, okay, you got a good idea, the government will go into business and create a business doing this, you lose everybody. And you lose the support for energy R&D. So be smart. Keep the government out of business. It doesn't belong there anyway. As Larry Summers says, the government has no good track record of being a venture capitalist. That's not their thing. So let's support the energy R&D and let the commercial enterprises take over. And I think it's natural, because I notice here and at MIT, the funding that we have, I'm not mistaken, Sally, it's about 3-to-1, private versus government. In other words, private people see something serious, and they want to know what's going on, and they want to contribute. And we shouldn't be nervous about that. A lot of universities go crazy if there's a business around. At Stanford, we figured, what the hell, Silicon Valley, just a big Stanford spinoff. We know these guys. And MIT was founded on the principle of business and universities acting together. So if something good comes along, these are the people who know how to commercialize it, who know how to scale it. That's good. It makes it part of the thing. So I think this support for energy R&D is an essential ingredient, and it's working. And it needs to be enhanced and worked with, because we're creating the future. Now, I also asked myself, I was the director of the Office of Management and Budget when President Nixon signed the legislation that created the EPA. So when a new agency is created, it doesn't exist. And it gets space and people from other agencies, and if nobody's representing you, you will get the dogs. So the OMB is the representative. So in a sense, I was the first director of EPA. We put the pieces together. And one of the things that struck me about it was all the young, bright people that I'd known in an earlier thing I'd done came and they say, how do I get to work for the EPA? Because there's so much low-hanging fruit, and it's very juicy, and they wanted to come into it. So I think the young people will work their tails off on this, and they're very enthusiastic, and it can be put together. I might say one of the things that they emphasized then, and it's been brought home to me fully here, is how much you can do by just the way you behave. The low-hanging fruit is saving energy. What's the least expensive energy? The energy you don't use. What's the cleanest energy? The energy you don't use. What's the most secure energy? The energy you don't use. I see Jim Sweeney sitting over here. Jim is about to publish a book that has stunning results in it about the importance of energy efficiency. Interestingly, the lynch point in his graphs is all 1973. I remember 1973 vividly because I was Secretary of Treasury at the time. We had the Arab oil boycott because we resupplied Israel, and it's the war going on. And it was a traumatic event. Christmas lights discouraged, gas stations closed on weekends. It made a deep impression. So we got to look for other things that make an impression. And I think, personally, as an economist, I guess you'd have to say, I believe in the price system. So if carbon is a problem, let's put a price on it. So I have long advocated a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Revenue neutral, so it doesn't present any fiscal no drag on the economy. And nobody can say you're generating money for somebody to use for this or that or the other. It's just there to level the playing field. Because you want sources of energy to compete equally and to bear the cost of what they produce. And if there's a form of energy that produces a lot of carbon, that should be paying for that. I notice this is I wrote a piece a long time ago on this, but it's gradually taking hold. There is an example in British Columbia that I think it's fair to say is working, although its scale is small. But more and more businesses are putting into their long-term investment plans the assumption that somehow they're going to have to regard carbon as having a price on it. I've noticed that the World Bank and the IMF have jointly come out advocating a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Anyway, I think a tax on what the problem is a good way to go. And I sell it to my conservative brethren by saying, well, you don't like the government telling you to do this, do that, don't do this. Okay, let's get rid of all that and just put a price out there and let people compete in terms of that price. And so that can do the job. So the energy R&D is really important. What's been already happening in states, I think there's a lot that can be learned looking from one state to another. And the federal government can learn from that. But don't sell private industry short. Steve is here as chairman of the Stanford trustees, and not too far from here is a power plant that Stanford has built. That is a fantastic plant. Very little carbon footprint to it. It has a way of combining solar with other ways of producing energy. It's classic. And this is done by a private university. So you can do these things, and they're doable, so let's let that multiply. Now, one final thing. I think it's fair to say that people realize that the Montreal Protocol was the one big international environmental treaty that worked. So let's take a look at how that happened. I was Secretary of State at the time, and we have, in the State Department, there was a group that worried about such things. And so we understood that there were a lot of scientists who thought the ozone layer was depleting. There were perfectly credible people who didn't agree. But we got them all together and said, well, what if it should happen? Everybody agreed that if it happened, it would be a catastrophe. So I talked this over carefully with President Reagan and with members of Congress. And it was a funny thing about Reagan. He was a man of the outdoors. He had a ranch in California. He'd dig post holes, he'd cut the grass. He liked to do that. And he loved what he called the endless horizon. It was inspirational to him. And he didn't want anybody to mess up that environment. So he was very conscious. I used to be in the construction business. And you find construction guys, they're very appreciative of the environment because they're out there working in it all the time. So there's big arguments about what should happen. And these days, it seems to me, if there's somebody disagrees with you, you have a fight with them. You villainize them. He said, no. Let's just put our arm around them and say, okay, you have a different opinion. We respect that. But you do agree that if it happens, it would be a catastrophe. So why don't we take out an insurance policy? You don't take an insurance policy because you think your house is going to burn down. You take it in case it happens to you. You hope it doesn't. So that had an appeal. It didn't get the people who were opposed to join us, but it got them off our back. So we could move, and as so often happens, when it's clear in the United States that something important is up, the juices, the creative juices in this country are fabulous, and they kick in. And in this case, the DuPont company came up with something you could do. Not something you could aspire to by 2025, but something you could do today. And so we started getting people to do it. And in the lower income countries, we had a little extra money to help them get that done. And when the fix was all in, we had a big meeting in Montreal. And it became called the Montreal Protocol. President Reagan called it a magnificent achievement. It was easily ratified in the Senate. Even some of the people who voted against said that they would have voted for it if their vote were needed. So we had people on board, and it has worked. And in retrospect, I think I've heard lots of knowledgeable people say that it's clear that the scientists who were worried were right, and the Montreal Protocol came just in time. So I think somehow we have to learn how to convert this issue and other issues. And I know when I was in the national government, we had an important issue. We made a big effort to say, let's try to create this as a nonpartisan issue, not bipartisan, nonpartisan, and get people to look at it that way. And then you can begin to get someplace. And I think that something like this, that has such a profound effect, not only on us, but brothers and sisters throughout the world, we should be able to get a kind of nonpartisan consensus on the importance of working at it. You mentioned quite a few of the things that are happening, Jennifer, which I agree with. One that I've become very conscious of recently, we have at Stanford here a wonderful woman named Lucy Shapiro. She's a biologist. She's more fun, and my wife loves her. She says, I know you're a great scientist, Lucy, but you're a real woman. That's what I like. But Lucy is great. And she says, as the globe warms, tropical diseases will move north. And we're not ready. It's beginning to happen, have you noticed? So there are all kinds of effects here. This is a big, important problem. And we have to deal with it. And we know how. We can do it. I remember when we had, it was a big break, some Texas oil companies got up Proposition 23 in California that would have killed off our environmental efforts. And Tom Steyer and I were asked by the governor to lead a campaign, Democrat and a Republican. So what do? We got both candidates for governor, the Republican and the Democrat, to endorse our position. So we said, this isn't a partisan issue, this is a nonpartisan issue. And then we put it forward very powerfully, and we determined at the beginning, I remember he and I talked and said, we don't want to just win. We want to win big. We want to make a big impact that the people of California care about this. So we campaigned hard. Fortunately, we raised some money, but Tom had a little, so he was able to put in some. And so we were able, one of the things you have to do with these things is have early money, because then you can reserve TV time near the election. And if you don't do it early, you don't get it. So we were able to do that. And we won among men, among women, among every age group, among every ethnic group. We really swept the board. But the whole concept was, this is a nonpartisan effort to protect the California environment that we all care about. And it includes, our most effective ad was a woman that looked like your mother, who was head of the American Lung Association. And she said, watch out for the quality of the air you breathe, and that made a huge impact. So that's all I have to say.